So we have evidence that this was a global catastrophe. Whoever did this, Sean, didn't want to just kill off the civilization on Mars. They wanted to kill off 99% of the life on Mars.
Welcome. I'm here again with the infamous Dr. John Brandenburg. John, welcome back.
It's always a pleasure and honor to be on your show, Sean.
All right. So we just had 3i Atlas. Today it is Saturday, December 20th. Yesterday, Friday, December 19th, it was the closest to Earth. And then tomorrow, I think, is the winter solstice, which is kind of interesting timing. So, yeah, strange coincidence that it would pass within 2 days of the darkest day of the year in North America. Very interesting. So, one of the aspects of this 3i Atlas thing is that you're hearing chatter inside the government, or we're hearing chatter, that the powers that be were a little freaked out that there was a chance that this thing might turn when it got closest to Earth. And as a result, there was preparation for, I guess, catastrophic disclosure, basically, in order to prepare the population for that. And I think the way that, no, not catastrophic, but controlled disclosure, to prevent catastrophic disclosure. And the first step in that, I think what you've told me is...
Emergency disclosure.
Yeah, emergency disclosure. And the first pathway to that was Mars. So we've done this in the past, but we're going to kind of rehash it a little bit. And, maybe I'll make it fancier this time. But we're going to have kind of a 2-episode segment. The first is just going to be, what's the deal with Mars? Like, what's to disclose? And then the second one would be, how is this actual Mars disclosure going to proceed? But with that, I'll let you take it away. What have they found on Mars, or what do you believe they found on Mars?
Well, you got to go back to where Percival Lowell started examining the canals on Mars. He had the best telescope on Earth in terms of sighting, and it was a very good telescope, and it was on top of a tall mountain in the desert, so he had really good seeing conditions. So he confirmed that these canals were on Mars, he thought. And by the way, at the same time, they had just finished the Suez Canal, and they were trying to build the Panama Canal. So everybody was obsessed with canals. Canals were a big deal on Earth. So he had basically confirmed that, yes, there are canals on Mars, which made it look like it had an artificial technological civilization. So that really got deeply embedded in the mindset of a lot of people in the scientific and governmental spheres. So they just took it for granted that they were going to confirm that there was not only life, but a civilization on Mars.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
And then, of course, this led to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, which really scared people. And you saw in that book levels of destruction for like London and places like that, described that you would only see later in World War II. And War of the Worlds was written in 1900. So Mars became the symbol of everything that was sought after scientifically and also feared scientifically and by the government in terms of extraterrestrial life and intelligence. So this continued on, of course, into World War II period. But at the same time, Robert Goddard, just before World War II, had been building missiles, and his driving motivation was to build a rocket that would carry people to Mars. That was his whole obsession. And he was finally building rockets that were going up several miles. And he moved his whole operation to a place where nothing ever happened, Roswell, New Mexico. Turns out this is 1937.
Strange coincidence.
But it immediately became a center of it. It is a very strange coincidence. And it immediately became a center of international intrigue because the German military before World War II, their intelligence infiltrated his team of technicians. So there was somebody on his team who was sending everything they were doing. Gyroscopes, rocket guidance control vanes, and things like this. All the details, fuel pumps, everything was being sent to Germany and put in the hands of Wernher von Braun. So he used all of that and, of course, spent an enormous amount of resources on that project to develop the V2, which was a really big rocket and carried a 1-ton warhead 200 miles. And they spent more on the V2 project in Nazi Germany than we spent on the Manhattan Project during World War II. And when you consider the Germans were fighting on the Russian front, and finally they were fighting a two-front war in France and also in Poland against the Russians. And then they were building these missiles and launching them at London at the same time. So that was a big advance in rocket technology, taking Goddard's dream and turning it into something that looked like a real spacecraft. And of course, then von Braun surrendered to the Americans with his team. He was afraid, by the way, that the SS would take them all out to a field and massacre them so that their knowledge wouldn't fall into the hands of the Allies. So, but he managed to arrange a surrender to American forces, and the American forces had people looking for him in what was called Operation Paperclip. They were trying to harvest as much technology from the Third Reich as they could. And the Russians were doing the same thing. They had an Operation Paperclipsky. So von Braun was obsessed with the idea of going to the moon and Mars. In fact, at one point he was imprisoned by the Gestapo because they said, "You're not interested in winning this war. All you want to do is go to Mars." And so Hitler himself had to, give him a reprieve, because by that time the V2 had proven it was a successful rocket for hitting London. So what happened then, this was all carried into, and of course the German scientists dominated the American rocket programs. And the Russians wanted to go to Mars too, because it looked like the only planet elsewhere in the solar system that was actually habitable. They continually overestimated the amount of air that was on Mars.
And they also did a lot of work on Venus,
it had
too,
polar
right?
caps like Earth. Well, both Mars and Venus are about the same distance from the Earth, but Venus is constantly covered with clouds, so you couldn't see its surface. And they, of course, imagined that it was a jungle planet with dinosaurs on it. And so Venus was close enough that you could get to it pretty easy. But then Carl Sagan, of all people, discovered that Venus was hotter than hell because of the greenhouse effect. That's where the greenhouse effect was first seen.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, Carl Sagan arranged an experiment where he took its temperature by radio waves. And so they lost interest in Venus fairly quickly and instead concentrated on Mars because it had polar caps, it had a clear atmosphere, and they thought had canals on it. So they proceeded, and of course, at the same time, the UFO cover up, the Roswell incident had happened in 1947 after World War II. And what most people do not realize is that all of the nuclear weapons on Earth were stored at Roswell. We had only had 5 nuclear weapons. I mean, the war was over. We had bombers to carry them, and they were all parked at Roswell. And so one of the aspects about Roswell that people don't understand is it was the first incident of the military having to confront the idea that flying saucers, which had been seen over Roswell in the weeks before this thing happened, seemed to be looking for the nuclear weapons. But we'll leave that aside for right now and just concentrate on Mars. But the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence basically had 2 fronts. It had kind of a European front. That was the flying saucer thing with Roswell. And then it also had the Mars front, where they thought they would confront intelligent species. And so that was sort of the Pacific front. So you had those 2 fronts, and the government wanted to investigate Mars, and they fully expected to find life on Mars and even maybe a civilization. But as it became obvious, as with spacecraft, that Mars was covered with craters like the moon, there was this original reaction of disappointment till they figured out that it didn't look like the moon at all. I mean, later probes show that the craters had been full of water and were connected to rivers, and that there was finally an ocean on Mars. I was the first person to find that, based on modern data from the spacecraft, that there had been an ocean on Mars covering about the 1/4 of its surface in the north. And they also landed in 1976 2 probes on Mars. They sampled the Mars atmosphere, and they also checked for life. Now, the life experiments had been done very carefully, and they apparently gave positive results. But the government apparently got cold feet about finding life on Mars.
When you say the life experiments, what kind of experiments? To detect bacterial life, like microbial life, or something higher than that?
Microbial. No, they were just looking for microbial life in the soil. And the experiments were basically take a sample of the soil, and this is all done robotically at 2 different spacecraft, 2 different landing sites, and they would take a scoop of Martian soil and put it in a chamber and pour chicken soup on it and see if it started fermenting, like life was eating the chicken soup. And it did look like it was doing that.
It's actually hard to believe that there wouldn't be any microbial life, given where we found bacteria in extreme environments on Earth. The fact that they were able to lie about this for so long is extraordinary.
Well, it shows the corrupting effect of the UFO cover-up on human science. Another area is gravity research. Unified field theory between gravity and electromagnetism, anti-gravity. That's been squelched by the government, and the government does that by controlling who gets grants. If you march into the Department of Energy and they ask you, "You don't believe in anti-gravity, do you?" Little green men and stuff like that, and the college professor says, no, perish the thought I would ever believe in such things. And they said, "Okay, here's your check. Study string theory, find 15 different dimensions, the theory of everything, my big toe, TOE, theory of everything." So what happened was the government apparently got cold feet on Mars. And they put soil into a cooker to cook it to see if there was any organic matter in it. And they didn't get any out. So they assumed it had no humus in it. It had no bacterial spores. And as it turns out, the soil on Mars is full of oxygen, bound oxygen. So if you heat it and there's organic matter in the soil, the first thing that happens is the oxygen gets released and burns up all of the organic matter. They've now shown that in the lab. So all
but they did
of
that on purpose. They acted like, oops, we screwed up, but we did that on purpose.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. They did not want to find life on Mars. They're calling this the legacy program of the UFO, the people who recover crashes. I mean, they have morgues full of alien bodies, and yet they're going to Mars and looking for life in the soil to see if there's life in the rest of the universe, when they already know damn well that there is. So what they did, though, was they decided to spike that. So 50 years ago, we actually discovered life on Mars, and they squelched it. They squelched the discovery. Now
Who's they?
It's
Who's they?
After
NASA?
3I Atlas, NASA, and basically the simplest way to explain it right now is we have two governments in this country. You
the United States
and
the Fourth Reich,
which whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, I'll call them the Fourth Reich.
They are a bunch of people. Yeah, okay. We have a public government with a constitution and a Congress and three branches, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is considered a rather dubious and transitory distraction from the real important business, which is the UFO cover-up. And that's what they call the legacy program does. It's the military-industrial complex foreseen by Eisenhower. And not only do we have a secret government, it's supported by its own secret police. So we have a constitutional problem in this country. This question of the UFO cover-up and the Mars cover-up is no longer just a scientific question. It is a constitutional law question. You can't have a government, a secret government like this. So what basically happened is they also found what looked like archaeology on Mars, but of course, they dismissed all of that as just tricks of lighting and things like this. So what has happened now is that's the way it stood. What has happened now is they've landed on Mars and they've found a lot of organic matter, billions of tons of it in the soil, because they have much better instruments than they had 50 years ago. And we have these Mars rovers, and they've found all this organic matter in Mars soil. So the original objection that there was no organic matter in the soil, therefore the life test couldn't be valid, that's completely out the window now. So we also know that the conditions on life on Mars and on early Earth were almost identical. Mars had an ocean, Earth has an ocean. We have a warm climate with liquid water, high atmospheric pressure to have liquid water. So does Mars. That's why there's all these old river channels and shorelines from an ancient ocean. So scientifically, you would expect there would have been life on Mars. And in fact, it probably began sooner because Mars, being smaller, would cool off quicker than the Earth. And it's farther from the sun, and it's also smaller, so it automatically cools off quicker and has a liquid ocean. And on Earth, they found basically as soon as there was a liquid ocean on Earth, you had life in it. So scientifically, we would expect there would have been life on Mars. And now, with what we found recently on Mars, it's obvious there is life on Mars and there was past life on Mars. Now, what has happened, Sean, this probably would stay buried for another 10 years. But what has happened is 3i Atlas. 3i Atlas has shown the government that they have to basically hasten disclosure. They have to inform the people that we're not alone in the universe, even of microbial life. Once you find life on Mars, then it's in the stars. And there's more than just microbial life remnants on Mars. There's also archaeology. Now, why is the government deciding to release all of this now? Just as soon as the 3i Atlas thing hit the news, suddenly NASA started releasing all this data on Mars, signs of Mars life. And not only that, they have now confirmed a new NASA director, and he's going straight for Mars. He's going to try and land on the moon too, but what he really wants to do is go to Mars. We have Elon Musk, of course, who has rockets that could reach Mars. And, those rockets are just sheet metal and liquid natural gas and oxygen. They're actually pretty cheap. The real cost of them was developing. But Elon Musk wants to go there to Mars, and this new NASA director wants to help him. So we're going to probably land Americans on Mars before the end of the decade, by 2030. And that's fine.
But so basically we have 5 years.
Here's what's going on.
We have 5 years to explain before they arrive there why there's structures at Cydonia Mensae and then Galaxis Chaos. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Here's why we have to send people to Mars, by the way. If you have life on Mars, that means Mars samples are now biohazards. We all know what an epidemic looks like, right? Imagine an epidemic of flesh-eating Mars bacteria getting loose that we have no immunity against. So what that means is we have to send people to Mars to test on Mars the soil for life, to confirm this. And that's going to happen in one day, by the way. They're going to land on Mars. Astronauts will take some soil samples. They'll take them inside, pour chicken soup on them. Boom. The Mars spores will reawaken, and they'll munch down on the chicken soup, and it'll be confirmed. But you can't do that on Earth without risking an epidemic. So I don't think it is a given that Mars samples are necessarily biohazards, but we can't take the chance. So the only way to really confirm life on Mars is to send astronauts to Mars. And, we've landed 2-ton rovers on Mars. We can land people. There is no problem at all.
How long will it take them to get there, though?
Well, there's a fast route that just takes 6 months. And what you do is when you get to Mars, you have a big heat shield, and NASA's already tested this. It's an inflatable heat shield. You deploy that, and you brake on the Martian atmosphere. You don't go into orbit around Mars. You just use the Mars atmosphere to slow down, and then you drop the heat shield, and you land your rocket like Elon Musk's rockets land on Earth. So he can do this. We have all the technology demonstrated to do this. And they've had people on the space station for a year at a time. And they come back down on Earth and they're fine. They readjust to Earth's gravity. And also, of course, if you send somebody in a weightless condition to Mars and they land on Mars, then there's Mars gravity, which is about 40% of Earth's gravity. So they're suddenly in a gravity field. And so we can do this thing. There is no problem at all with doing this thing. We have the technology to do it, and we have the will to do it. And it's very strange. Von Braun wrote a kind of docu-fiction, kind of little short novelette about life on a Mars colony. He wrote it in 1955. And in that, the governor of the Mars colony is named Elon. I know, you can't make this stuff up. There's some really important stuff going on here that's, let's just say I'm a Christian. I believe, of course, in the supernatural. That's what I try to go to church on every Sunday, just to keep that aspect of my life covered, you know. But the face on Mars that was discovered in 1976 by the Vikings, that's at Cydonia Mensa, and there's a pyramid within 5 miles of it. It's 5-sided.
It's the D&M pyramid,
what
right?
You realize the D&M pyramid, DePietro and Molinar pyramid, and it's 5-sided. So you have a 5-sided pyramid, and then 5 miles away, you have this big carved face. So NASA never shows the picture that shows the pyramid and the face in one picture frame. They never do that because it's obvious once you see this that there's archaeology on Mars. So what happened is in 1960, there was a science fiction comic called Kirby Comics, and there's the face on Mars. In 1960, shows these astronauts climbing over this giant face on Mars. So there's sort of some spooky stuff going on here.
Yeah, precognition.
Right. Anyway, let's just say there's precognition. It's as if the human race has known for a long time that Mars used to be inhabited. Now, the civilization on Mars that left us archaeology, we have 2 carved faces on Mars, one at Galaxis Chaos, that's a place on Mars about halfway around the planet from Cydonia Mensa. And then, of course, we have the face in the pyramid. So we have abundant evidence of archaeology on Mars. And the interesting thing is the faces look human. Even though the best estimate we have is that Mars climate changed dramatically 200 million years ago. So Mars went into a deep freeze before there was even dinosaurs on Earth, or maybe just the beginning of the dinosaur age. So we have, and look, I will just tell you this. This is a gift from God. This gets the government off the hook as far as disclosure is concerned, because they don't have to talk about the UFOs / drones, UAPs, things like that. They don't need to talk about the cattle mutilations. They don't need to talk about the abductions. They don't need to talk about military clashes with UFOs. All they need to do is talk about Mars. They say, oh, there's life on Mars, and we're going to send American astronauts up to confirm that. But it's a lead pipe cinch that there is life on Mars. There's enormous amounts of evidence now that that's true. And then there's archaeology on Mars. So in one kind of step, you could convince everyone that there is life on Mars and therefore it's in the stars. So there's part of disclosure. We're not alone anymore in the universe. And then there's a dead civilization on Mars. And never mind right now for how it died, but what it is, Sean, is these discoveries are very non-threatening to the public. Denial, as we know, Sean, is not just a river in Egypt. If you overload people with things that really scare them, they dive under the bed mentally and they don't want to think about it. That's one reason the UFO cover-up has lasted so long, is that people don't want to think about the real implications of that. But on Mars, the stuff is dead. I mean, it's just microbes and archaeology, and it looks like it was a primitive civilization. We're not going to have a war of the worlds with these Martians. They're dead. And that means it's very non-threatening to the public. Not only that, we're going to go land on Mars, showing that we are, in this universe, we are spacefaring. We are somebody. So that is the gift situation that the government confronts, and it's going to take maximum advantage of it, apparently. It doesn't want to talk about UFO disclosure. It wants to talk about Mars disclosure because it's non-threatening.
Now, you mentioned Cydonia Mensa. What about Galaxis Chaos? What's the situation there? What did they find there?
Well, Cydonia Mensa is on the shoreline of the ancient ocean, Northern Ocean on Mars, which, by the way, I discovered. I went to a scientific conference in Washington, D.C., and presented the paper to 1,000 Mars scientists who received it enthusiastically. And then the government didn't embrace the idea. They waited 10 years and then suddenly say, hey, there's an old ocean on Mars. But they never give me credit. If you go to Wikipedia and look up Mars ocean theory, I'm reference number 1. So Wikipedia gives me credit. NASA does not, because I helped investigate the dead civilization on Mars. In fact, I found the Galaxis Chaos site. Galaxis Chaos, if you follow the ocean shoreline around the north of Mars and then follow it out to halfway around the planet, then you come to this place where there's actually 2 faces. One face is more flat, so it hasn't got as high relief, but the other face looks very similar to the face at Cydonia. It's a face wearing a helmet, so just Google Galaxis Chaos face on Mars, and it'll pop up this picture. They have multiple pictures of it. It's been confirmed. It is a face, just like the one at Cydonia. However, there's no pyramid nearby it. There's just another face. But it's surrounded by what looks like ruins of a city, and it's right on the shoreline of this ancient ocean, just like Cydonia Mensa. So, as you would expect, just like on Earth where you had the Mediterranean Sea, and all these civilizations sprung up around the Mediterranean coast, the same thing on Mars. On the northern coast of Mars ocean, you found all of this archaeology. And so that is the enormous opportunity. And that, by the way, is what I've been telling the government to do for 20 years. Now they have decided to do it, and it's because of the 3-Eye Atlas. They don't want to get caught with their pants down around their ankles by another 3-Eye Atlas, this time headed for Earth. I mean, if we wake up one morning and they're reporting the Death Star is heading towards Earth, which is what people were thinking about the 3-Eye Atlas, was it might be the Death Star. But fortunately, it's just heading straight out to Jupiter now. So it'll never become publicly known what it really was. It'll become a subject of academic debate. And I'm not part of academia as a scientist. I'm part of the defense/intel space world. And I was also aware that there was a UFO cover-up. I was working in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. And so I knew we were not alone in the universe. So I just look on the 3-Eye Atlas and I look at its trajectory, first doing a close pass on Mars. And then finally, it's heading out for Jupiter. And then, of course, it got close to the sun. and they made sure the sun was between the Three-Eye Atlas and the Earth, so we couldn't get a good look at it. All of this stuff looks like it was carefully planned by somebody. But in any case, what's done is done. And what the government has now decided is it's going to move to disclosure. So I would expect the U.S. government within a few months to announce that it has very strong evidence for life on Mars, and therefore we are going to do a crash program to put Americans on Mars to investigate and confirm this historic discovery.
Before we get into the details of that program or what that disclosure might look like, what happened to Mars? What happened to this civilization or these civilizations? And how do we know what happened to them?
That's what, as it turns out, the first shoe that drops on Mars is the fact that there's a life in a dead civilization there. Okay, then what's the other shoe? The other shoe is, why are they dead? Why does Mars look like a frozen desert now when it used to be like Earth? And that was a grim discovery. The first time I heard of that possibility was I was working at a U.S. government nuclear weapons lab where they did atmospheric testing. In those days, if the North Koreans set off a hydrogen bomb, could you fly off the coast of North Korea and pick up isotopic traces in the atmosphere that would reveal that they tested a hydrogen bomb? And it turns out you can. When you set off a hydrogen bomb, it puts out a fingerprint of nuclear isotopes, some of which don't last very long. Others actually are permanent. They're stable. On Mars, noble gases, one of the heaviest noble gases called xenon, and there's a certain isotope that is produced by nuclear weapon explosions. It's called xenon 129. So that is weapon signature. And Mars' atmosphere is full of it. It's also full of other residues. That's the direct result of the hydrogen bomb. Then there are secondary results from like the neutrons from a hydrogen bomb. We're talking hydrogen bombs as big as the Empire State Building dropped from space on apparently what looks like a primitive civilization. This was a massacre, apparently. That's the best reconstruction I can make based on the data. What happened is you have all of this xenon 129 weapon signature. Apparently, Mars lost most of its atmosphere in roughly a day, going from having an atmosphere thick like the Earth's to having what it has now, which is like being up in a very high altitude plane above 100,000 feet. And then you also have...
How do we know that? How do we know it was roughly a day?
The result of... We know that because we know the solar wind from the sun is blasting Mars, because Mars doesn't have a magnetic field like the Earth. Or it had one, and Mars is smaller than Earth, so its core just froze finally, and it cooled off. So the magnetic field stopped. And that, when you get this sandblasting of the Mars atmosphere, which is what people thought caused Mars to lose its atmosphere, slow over billions of years, it means it leaves the heavier isotopes behind. Like nitrogen-15 is heavier than nitrogen-14, so you end up with a lot of nitrogen-15 compared to nitrogen-14. And you can go down the list of isotopes, and what you find is the isotopes match Earth pretty close for like nitrogen. And what that means is that it didn't erode slowly. It apparently lost it all in one big explosion. In other words, you scooped up a bunch, about 9/10 of the atmosphere, and just threw it out into space. And what was left had the same isotopes pretty much as Earth. And so it left that. But of course, there was the xenon 129 weapon signature left in there. Then there was also the irradiation of the surface of Mars with an enormous amount of neutrons, which made all the potassium radioactive. And the potassium, when it absorbs, if it's a big burst of neutrons, it absorbs 2 neutrons instead of just 1. If it absorbs 1, it makes it radioactive, the potassium. Potassium's in all the rocks. But if you get a really big burst of neutrons all at once, then it absorbs 2 neutrons in a row and puts out an isotope called argon-40. Mars has 10 times as much argon-40 in its atmosphere proportionally as the Earth. So we have evidence for a nuclear weapons detonation, or 2 of them rather. We have evidence that the loss of Mars was sudden and explosive. And we also have that this was accompanied by the bombardment of Mars' surface with an enormous number of neutrons. As we know, that's where we got the neutron bomb. They know how to build hydrogen bombs that'll put out most of their energy in neutrons. And apparently there was some effort to do that. So, Sean, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, quick follow-up. How do we know it was approximately 200 million years ago?
Excellent question. The Mars atmosphere is so thin, you can actually make very sensitive gamma ray detectors. Not only do they detect the gamma rays, but they can detect what kind of energy they have. That means they can look for isotopic fingerprints for radioactive isotopes because they put out characteristic gamma rays. So they orbited Mars and they mapped Mars in various radioisotopes. One of them was radioactive potassium. They found a lot of that. Then they found 2 hotspots where apparently the bombs went off. Then they found a bunch of thorium, which is another radioactive isotope that you put in bombs to make them neutron bombs, as it turns out, because it enhances neutron output. For instance, we tested a neutron warhead for knocking down other missiles in space, the anti-ballistic missile warhead, and we tested it up in Alaska at Kamchatka, and its casing was full of thorium. And what's interesting is as soon as I started publishing, I was given the go-ahead to publish what I found on Mars. I briefed a fellow from the Defense Intelligence Agency on what I'd found. He took careful notes. He said, "We'll get back to you." And I thought, well, I'll probably never hear from him. Then 6 weeks later, they sent back word through channels. They said, "Publish." So I published it. And shortly thereafter, since part of the evidence of these enormous hydrogen bombs on Mars is these big swaths of thorium, radioactive element, that was declassified after I had been told to publish. So basically, the government wanted this to come out. They didn't want it to come out officially. They didn't want anybody famous to publish this. They wanted somebody infamous to publish this. So they picked me. So anyway, I was just a good soldier. They told me to take the hill, Sean, and I took it. So what happens is the isotopes that you form when you irradiate the surface with neutrons, they have certain half-lives. Some of them are short, some of them are long. The only ones we see at these hotspots are the very long-lived ones, and that's why we can estimate this happened probably 200 million years ago. about still the age of the early dinosaurs, the early ones, what
And then
was called the Triassic.
and then isn't this also further triangulated by meteorites that have crashed on the planet both before, on the planet being Earth, have crashed on
Yes,
Earth both before and after the
yes,
event? There's different radiological signatures on each type of asteroid. Asteroids from, not asteroids,
yes.
meteorites from Mars. Right.
Sean, I compliment you on your background on this. That's the other leg that stands on. Not only do we have surveys of the surface of Mars showing only very long lived isotopes from these nuclear scars, but we also have meteorites from Mars that were lying on the surface when apparently this happened. Only the young Mars meteorites that crystallized in the last 300 million years, 200 million, show signs that they were exposed to enormous amounts of neutron radiation. The ones younger than that don't show it. So we were able to triangulate this discovery. And that's also, by the way, makes this less threatening to the public because they realize whoever did this thing, this massacre on Mars, is long gone. They were around before the time of the dinosaurs, or roughly the time of the first dinosaurs, and they're gone now. And they haven't come back because, Sean, that's why we're having this conversation, because they haven't come back. And now, if they come back, we have at least a fighting chance of stopping them. So the whole goal here is to make sure this doesn't happen on Earth.
You said there were two hotspots. What were the two hotspots again?
The two hotspots, one is near Cydonia Mensa, and they're out over the ocean. So these were airbursts. Both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they triggered the atomic bombs to go off several thousand feet in the air because that maximized the shock damage. If you drop a atomic bomb on somebody or a hydrogen bomb, you don't want all the energy going into the dirt. You want it to go into the atmosphere to form a big shock wave. That's what they did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it doesn't make a crater. So if you look at these two hotspots on Mars, there's no crater. There's just a hotspot of potassium, and overlaying the hotspot of potassium is a hotspot of thorium. Then you realize, okay, if these explosions happened in the north, then the shock wave would have wrapped all the way around the planet. We saw that when Krakatoa exploded on Earth. The shock wave goes all the way around the planet and collides with itself on the far side, in this case, the southern hemisphere, on the other side of the planet. And there's another hot spot there too. So we have evidence that this was a global catastrophe. Whoever did this, Sean, didn't want to just kill off the civilization on Mars. They wanted to kill off 99% of the life on Mars. They wanted to make sure that Mars never rose again, that the intelligent life on Mars could never recover, that its genocide was just complete. And so this looks very much like something the Mongols taking. If a city resisted them, they would kill everyone in the city and behead them all and make pyramids of heads. And this was a lesson to the next city. If we show up at the front gate, just open the gates. Let us take what we want. Don't fight. Just do what we tell you to do. It's called winning through terror. And it's very effective. The Germans did this at Rotterdam. They were not supposed to bomb Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The Netherlands had no air force. The Germans came over with bombers and bombed the city of Rotterdam, and the Dutch had a good army and they were fighting the Germans. But after they bombed Rotterdam, the Netherlands, the will to resist by the Netherlands collapsed. So it works. Terror works. If you're not prepared to deal in a terror situation, you can lose just by giving in to terror. And this looks like it was an act of terror.
One last question on Mars. That scar on Mars, does that have anything to do with
Yes,
this, or was that something entirely different?
it's conceivable that it could have something to do with it, but I think a simpler explanation is that scar, the Valles Marineris. It's a Grand Canyon on Mars. It would stretch from New York City to Los Angeles if it was on the American continent. That scar looks as though it is due to natural geologic forces. But you know what, Sean? We don't know. We don't know a lot of the details. I haven't been wrong very often in my career. I've been very fortunate. But the only times I've ever been dead wrong about something was I said, well, that's impossible. George Norrie put it this way. He said, in order to know, we have to go. We have to send astronauts up there to take samples of that rock from the walls in that Valles Marineris and get some idea of how did that form. But I regard that as of less importance than the archaeology and, of course, the radioactive scars on Mars due to these nuclear weapons. So we have a great opportunity here. The U.S. government, by the end of the decade, by next year, could just get everyone used to the idea that there was and is life, microbial life on Mars. We're going to go to Mars, confirm that. Then they're going to find a dead civilization on Mars. And all of this means we know we're not alone in the universe. And that we are, not only does it say that, but we are spacefaring then. If we go to Mars, we are spacefaring. We've gone to another planet. And then the other big boot to drop is the fact that this nuclear massacre, that Mars is dead because of a nuclear massacre. Now, that's important to tell the public also eventually. The nice cushion on that one is that it's 200 million years ago, but it means that we have to spend a lot of money on space defense, which we have to do.
Any final words for the audience?
It has to be done. I'm sorry.
Before we go into all the detail about what this timeline will look like for disclosure in the next episode, any final words for this one?
I'll give it to you straight. You're going to have to be tough. None of this, you can't handle the truth. That's just a dodge by the government. The government is going to lay this out on the table for you, and you're going to have to listen and deal with it. You're going to have to man up. By God. I mean, imagine waking up on December 8th and suddenly you're at war because Pearl Harbor has been devastated and most of our Pacific fleet is sunk. That's what our ancestors had to deal with. They had to fight the British, the superpower at the time, in order to gain independence. You can't get through life dodging mental realizations. That's denial. No, you have to face up to them. To face up the fact we're not alone in the universe, and the universe is a place where, just like Earth, bad stuff happens. Important thing is to be aware of that and make sure that bad stuff doesn't happen to us. That means when we must become spacefaring, we have to grow up, to be tough, wise, and brave. There.
All right, John.
That's my message.
As always, an absolute pleasure, and look forward to speaking with you in the next episode.
Live long and prosper.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.